Welcome into the Hot Read podcast live on a Tuesday, October the 15th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me on Twitter at JT_Ruhnke. And once again, I am joined by my lovely co-host, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief of Sobros Network, 1/3 of Football and Other F Words podcast, and co-writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, coming to the people at a little bit of a different time today because of some things we had to move around. But nevertheless, we are coming into this one hot and bothered after the Titans lost yet another winnable game to the Indianapolis Colts 20-17. And I'm over it. And I think we're gonna have a wonderful conversation about the Tennessee Titans team in 2024 today. But maybe you share a different sentiment. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, JT. I appreciate you accommodating my schedule. My father-in-law's in town. He's playing a gig tonight, but it's like the early bird special. You know, we got to get home. We can't be out past bedtime. So he's playing at 5 o'clock. I got to hop in a lift as soon as I'm out of here. And we make things happen around here. And that's what I'm very proud of. And I'm very thankful that you are willing to accommodate me.
Yeah, no problem. And I think that, obviously we have some people in the chat already giving off their hottest Will Levis takes and whatnot about the Titans season. That's what today's show is going to be, talking about mostly this Titans loss to the Indianapolis Colts, discussing some things about Will Levis and Brian Callahan. Should the experiment be over? Is it already over and they aren't really talking about it? Those are things we're going to get into today. Also, yes, we know we like to have a little bit of a club hype music here at the beginning of the show. I know I see Zach in the comments, crying and moaning and, being a little brat about the show taking forever to start. But hey, so, unlike some of the other shows on the 440 network, it's not as simple as to start a 30-second countdown and retweet the show once. No, my friend, we try to up the ante over here at the Hot Read podcast. Do a little bit more than the boomers over on a certain other show do it. But that's a great segue into the sponsor of all 440 shows, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages. If you know 440, you know them. If not, we are happy to introduce you on this show. Thank you once again to Sinkers Beverages. More on them later. Stoney, like I said, I'm officially over it. This is It's a lot of frustrating football the Titans are continuing to play. And I feel like over the past 2 years on this show specifically, kind of, through the first 10 to 11 episodes I've done with you or so, I can't keep track anymore of how many episodes I've done, but certainly over the 300-ish episodes that I did close to now with Easton Freeze, I feel like I was always the glass half full guy, trying to teach some patience on this show and not go full lose my mind, turn into the Titans Joker. But I feel like I can't do that anymore because this team has pissed me off to a point where I can't see it that way anymore. And I think that's what we're going to get into today. I think it's time to be a lot more critical of this team and some of the things that they've done, which I just think are absolutely unacceptable. But before we get into that, we should have a conversation about what's going on around the NFL today. And if you are joining us live on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor, head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 YouTube channel to join the comments like Eddie and Zach and Easton and Kenneth over there to talk about Will Levis and the rest of the Titans, because we want to hear a lot from you. Your hottest takes about Will Levis, Brian Callahan, that whole situation, everything and anything we are going to discuss today. But two massive wide receiver trades went down earlier today. The first of two was Davante Adams being traded to the New York Jets after a very disappointing loss last night to the Buffalo Bills. Sure sounds like to me that this was going to happen always, because Davante Adams was already in the building this morning as it was announced. He goes on Pat McAfee with Aaron Rodgers. I saw a tweet that it says it looks like the two of them probably shared the night together because they knew this was going to happen all along. But the Raiders get a rounder pick back for Davante Adams. It can become a second round pick based on performance. Davante Adams and his contract go to the New York Jets. And then the team that beat the New York Jets last night, the Buffalo Bills said, all right, let's one up you. And they trade for Amari Cooper from the Cleveland Browns. They send a 2025 third round pick and a 2026 seventh round pick in return for Amari Cooper and a 2025 sixth round pick. And I think that got a lot of people talking. Certainly, we'll discuss this more on Friday's show. Titans play the Bills this week. How much of Amari Cooper will the Titans really see this week as they go up to Buffalo? But a bigger Titans spin on it. There's been a lot of conversations about, could DeAndre Hopkins be the next domino to fall in this wide receiver trade market? Could it possibly be Calvin Ridley? The first question I want to ask to you here is, it feels like if there was a wide receiver to be dealt by the Tennessee Titans this year, it most likely would be DeAndre Hopkins. And I put out earlier today that, even if Davante Adams is getting a third round pick and Cleveland is getting a third round pick for Amari Cooper, I don't think the Titans would even sniff something that close. My mind would be set at, for DeAndre Hopkins specifically, I feel like the best they could do is a condition, maybe a fifth round pick, just base fifth round pick, no conditional whatsoever. That's where my head's at. Stoney, if DeAndre Hopkins was to be traded, what do you think the compensation would likely be?
Well, before I forget this note, I just want to take a dig at Buffalo, because y'all said, oh, they got their wide receiver one. They drafted Keon Coleman. He's the guy. And I tried to tell y'all, and now look, here we are. We got the Bills trading for a wide receiver at the trade deadline. So, well, it's not the trade deadline, but they're trading for a wide receiver nonetheless. As far as compensation, I don't think a fifth is unreasonable to ask for DeAndre Hopkins at this point, but I definitely think it's a day three sort of value for him. My question, let's just get off the rails right here, right off the first question you asked me. I'm going to go off the rails. Wanye Morris straight up for DeAndre Hopkins. Who says no? They flip him back to right tackle where he played at Oklahoma. Who says no?
Probably both teams, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly. Sorry to
trying to come up with creative solutions. Solutions for this Titans shit show.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we definitely will talk about, the offensive line, later in the show. But it's an interesting conversation because, like you say there, the point of the matter is that I don't think the Titans could get that much in returon for DeAndre Hopkins at this stage in his career, and I think they wouldn't get the same as Amari Cooper and Davante Adams. And I think it's really simple. You look at what Amari Cooper and a Davante Adams brings to a team, even if they are in all the same age range of 30-ish to 32. Amari Cooper and Davante Adams are still able to stretch the field and kind of take the top off a defense, and that's just not something that DeAndre Hopkins can do anymore. You look at these guys, DeAndre Hopkins doesn't really pose that much of a deep threat like he used to in his career. He has amazing hands at the point of the catch, and his ability to bring the ball in is still undoubtedly one of the best attributes of his game, and he may be the best at that in the league. But for a team like the Jets, who, in the Jets, I think they're just kind of going along with this Aaron Rodgers coup d'etat right now and just letting him do whatever he wants. I don't know how much that helps this team. And you look at a team like Buffalo that needs a guy who can stretch the field like that. DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think, was ever going to be a fit for them. And if you look at other teams that might need wide receivers, the logical team, the only other logical team I could really think of right now, the Chiefs. But then again, what does DeAndre Hopkins necessarily bring to the Chiefs that Travis Kelce already doesn't do for that team? And that's sit in zone and find the hole and be able to bring the ball in for Patrick Mahomes to be that safety team. I was talking about how DeAndre Hopkins probably doesn't offer that much of a upgrade to a guy like Travis Kelce, who sits in soft zone and is that security blanket for Patrick Mahomes. So outside of that, I don't think there is much more for a DeAndre Hopkins out there besides what he is bringing to this Titans team right now, which, if he was to get traded, that definitely takes a hit for this team that is still striving to be competitive this year.
Yeah, and the other team that's kind of floated out there in rumors is the Pittsburgh Steelers for DeAndre Hopkins, and I'm kind of curious as to how he fits into that receiving core as well, especially considering what the Steelers have at quarterback. There's a little bit of uncertainty there. It's, he's a guy that you want, assuming you can get the ball out to him. And they haven't been doing good enough job of that here in Tennessee. So I don't know what the incentive would be for a team like Pittsburgh to make the trade for him. I kind of feel like it's Kansas City or bust if we're gonna have that conversation for Hopkins. And I do think that you can still cause some conflict with him in that Chiefs offense, because what you're doing is basically upping the number of receivers that the defense has to account for in their zones and underneath and that sort of thing. And they still have the long speed with Xavier Worthy. No, I don't think DeAndre Hopkins is a similar style receiver to Rashee Rice, who left the hole in the Chiefs passing game, but I still think at this point, they probably just need another body there, and they can work with the skill set that they get. So I get what you're saying, JT, but I do think it would be worth it for Kansas City to add another weapon.
The other option that has been floated around is the Chiefs going after a guy like Calvin Ridley, who I let me just say this. I think that's ridiculous. I don't think that would ever happen. Someone asked me about this earlier today and texted me, and they said, man, would the Titans ever consider trading Calvin Ridley? And I said, would the Titans ever consider it? I don't think any other team would consider it because of that contract. I don't see how you're going to get more than a third for Calvin Ridley. I don't think you would even get a third for Calvin Ridley because the contract that he also brings is just so large. I don't see why a team would do that for a rental type player in a win now build. And so either of those guys. Now the one I will say for Kansas City before we move on here, I've heard some people bring up the idea that Deontay Johnson to Kansas City would be a nice fit, and I think that'd be very scary for the rest of the league, and I hope it doesn't happen, but for my fantasy teams, I hope it does.
And then Hopkins to Carolina.
There you go. Perfect.
For Bryce Young.
Yeah, for Bryce Young. There we go. We figured it out. 3-team trade here. Perfect. Yeah. I don't know what the Titans are going to get back besides Bryce Young in that trade, but there we go. We just pass assets around right there.
Give us the team.
I love it. But I think either way, we heard from Brian Callahan yesterday when it comes to what this season means for the Tennessee Titans. He was asked whether it is about finding what Will Levis is or staying to be a competitive team. And Brian Callahan noted that above all else, the goal of this team is to be competitive. And if you were to trade one or both, or, one of Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins, or hell, even both, if that is the timeline that we are in this weird NFL season, you are going against what your motto is there of trying to be a competitive football team in 2024. And so I think that at the end of the day, could we see DeAndre Hopkins get dealt at the deadline, which is in 3 weeks, because this team loses to Buffalo, this team loses to Detroit, and then somehow loses to Drake May and in the New England Patriots? I think you could make a case that DeAndre Hopkins does get dealt then, but for right now, this team's going to still try to win games. Brian Callahan, a new coach, wants to win games. And I think that's something that you need DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley around for. So I think that's a good point, a good place to move on to the meat of today's discussion, which is the Will Levis experiment done? Like, is it over? And I think there's a bunch of different ways that you can attack this conversation. And of course, if you're joining us live on Twitter or Facebook and want to get in on the conversation about Will Levis and Brian Callahan and the rest of this Titans offense in 2024, do us a favor, head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube page, where you can join Joshua and Jake and Zach and Kenneth in the comments. Zach over here says, trade Jaquan Jackson. I don't know.
Yes.
Could you even get a bag of footballs for Jaquan Jackson? I don't know.
You might could get Bryce Young for
For
Jaquan Jackson.
Jaquan Jackson, you might. Wow.
You might.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe.
Maybe that's how low we are on Bryce Young nowadays. And I don't blame you for that. And Jake saying Hopkins stretches the field as well as Easton rides a bike. He doesn't. I saw Easton last night tried to debunk these bike riding rumors, saying that he actually could, when in fact I do have an inside source that told me the people that were portraying his family in that group chat were paid actors. So that continues to be a point of contention for Easton, but
he's a grifter. What a grifter.
We can move on to the Will Levis experiment and how it's gone so far. And I think the easiest thing to say is that it's not gone well whatsoever. You've played 5 games now in which Will Levis and company, in the games that he has played, have only put up 17 points or less. You look at it, and then in comparison, you look at the game that Mason Rudolph played in, and they score 30 points for the first time in over 1,000 days. And, we're starting that new streak this week. What has it now been? It's been like 15 to 17-ish days. I don't know, something around there, that since the Titans have scored 30 points. Can't wait to keep track of that one. And I think this conversation needs to start with some context. And that is, we talked to Brian Callahan after the loss on Sunday. He had his press availability yesterday. And one question that was brought up definitely is that is Brian Callahan talked about how Will Levis was a big reason as to why he took the job, because he liked the aspects of Will Levis's game he saw on tape, that he could coach up and he could make work in his style of offense. And so a question that was brought up yesterday was, that was kind of the sentiment you had to start the year. And now you kind of look at what Will Levis is now. Do you have that same confidence and same belief in Will Levis? And so here's what Brian Callahan had to say.
Yeah, it is. I think that there's plenty of things that we have to keep getting better at with him. There's things that he does well. Got to keep finding ways to highlight those things for him. But yeah, he needs a little bit of success too. He needs to get a little confidence going. I think that's right now where everybody's at, is we need to find a way to start validating our work. And right now we don't have enough of it. And so the confidence parts that's a real part of playing quarterback. You keep coming up on the back end of these things and not winning. You got to find a way to fight through that. And you got to be, it's part of what I believe in, and you have to be resilient. And to play quarterback in the NFL, you got to be resilient. You got to be probably more resilient than any position, because the scrutiny is so intense, and that's just how it is. And I think that he gets a little momentum going his way, and I'm confident that we can find ways to win.
So he talks about how he believes that Will Levis can be the quarterback he thought he could be, and he's shown flashes, but it ultimately comes down to building up that confidence for the young Will Levis, who continues to lead the league in interceptions thrown. So if you want to build confidence in your quarterback, wouldn't the right idea be to lean into his strengths? And what I mean by strengths is the conservative play calling that we've seen are certainly not something that is going to get Will Levis into a groove in a game like we've seen in the past. We talk about how the offense so far has been very lackluster throughout the first 6 games. And you look at, sometimes there are drives where it feels like Will Levis has all the confidence in the world. You see Brian Callahan opening that playbook in his bag, so to speak. And you see these 14 to 15 play drives where you see them using all different kinds of looks and scheming guys open, where Will Levis is able to just march down the field, and they have really successful drives. And then as they continue to try to do that, Will Levis makes one mistake and the playbook basically fully closes on itself. And I think when Brian Callahan talks about, wanting to build confidence in his young quarterback, well, the same can be said for you. It's as much on Brian Callahan to continue to let Will Levis try to build that confidence by doing what he does best, which is airing the ball out and getting it downfield without, trying to close the playbook and give him no opportunity to do that. And so I want to take another look at 2 clips here. One from post-game after the Colts game, and then one from yesterday. So maybe, 24 hours removed or so, not even 24 hours, but after time he was able to talk, he was able to think about it. Here's first what Brian Callahan said about the conservative nature of the play calling down the stretch in the Indianapolis game.
Because right now we're running the ball well, but as you can see, that even running the ball well doesn't give you enough. You got to be able to throw it and throw it with some efficiency, and we've not done a good enough job of that. And that ultimately is not me; that's my job. And we got to find ways to put guys in better position. We got to find things that we can execute better than we have, and that's really all there is to it. You got to be able to throw the ball in the NFL to win. That's bottom line. You can run the ball really well, and we do that well, but we got to find ways when the game's tight. We got to throw it to make enough plays to get us a chance to win the game.
So he talks about himself finding ways to throw the ball when the game gets close like that to win the game. Obviously, the run has been a strength of this team, and so he admits that the play calling there got conservative towards the end of the game because they were leaning on the run. Whether that means he thinks that this team could have closed them out relying on the defense, only up like 3 points in the fourth quarter, or if there's something a little bit more underlying there that maybe there's not that much confidence instilled in the quarterback play right now to let him run the offense. Here's what Brian Callahan had to say about the conservative play calling at yesterday's press conference.
No, I don't think that's the case. No. I think there's a lot of things that he can do better. There's things that I can do to help him better. And then there's around him can play better too. I think that we're really close. There's a lot of things that we do well, and there's a lot of things that we just haven't quite gotten over the hump on when it comes to losing one-score games. We lost 3 of them now, where we're in position to have a chance to win, and we haven't done it. And I don't know that that's necessarily it's not all a Will thing either. There's things that I can do better to help them, and just haven't been there yet. And again, we're tight, we're close, and we got to play better. There's no doubt. And he's got to play better, but there's things that I think are encouraging and positive about it as well.
If the theme of the season, though, is to see Will do everything Will can do and get an ultimate verdict on, wouldn't that idea fall in line with letting him cut it loose more rather than playing it safe?
Yeah, there's definitely calls that go down the field that don't get thrown down the field. So yeah, I don't. It was conservative nature in some of the runs because we run the ball well. But yeah, we can just drop back and throw it down the field more. Sure, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
I don't. That one really stuck out to me because it feels like we're dancing around the discussion of we're not doing that because he doesn't think that he can do it anymore. And I want to take a look back. I went into one of my favorite databases in the NFL, Fantasy Points database, and looked at Will Levis in 2023 through his first 6 starts. That would be game 8 to game 13. And specifically looking at the balls he threw downfield 20 plus yards. In those 6 games last season in 2023, Will Levis attempted 36 passes of 20 plus yards, completed 11 of them for 396 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, and a passer rating of 98.8. 9 of those balls of the 36 could be considered hero balls, according to Fantasy Points. And 3 of those 36 were deemed turnover-worthy throws. Fast forward to the first 6 games of the Titans season so far. And in that same stat of 20-plus yards throws, he's attempted just 15 of them, completed 6 for 136 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a quarterback rating of 73.2, only 1 hero-rated throw, and 5 turnover-worthy throws out of those 15. I don't know about you, but last year through 6 games, only 12%, or only, you look at it, only 12% of those throws last year were turnover-worthy throws. And through 6 games this year, a third are turnover-worthy throws. And, Zach also brings up an interesting point. He whispers, take out the Atlanta game for those touchdowns that obviously can bring into the picture here. But I think it gets to the point where things have drastically changed for the way that they use Will Levis. And I think we're getting to a point where it may just be because we've seen, the best of Will Levis last year, and we've fully regressed to the mean, which is that he is what people have said he was on tape. And it reflects the tape that, his decision-making and that deep ball may not be as good as it was in those first 3 games last year. And so I just wonder, after listening to those answers, where it feels like we're all dancing around the point of, we may be getting towards the end of the experiment here, where Will Levis just simply is not the guy and is not going to cut it as the quarterback of the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah, I'm ready to dig the grave myself, JT. Like, let's call it over. Let's bury this experiment. We're seeing the same mistakes over and over. And by the way, props to Paul Kaharski for really, I don't want to say drilling Brian Callahan on that. I think they're fair questions, but they're questions that nobody else was willing to ask in that press conference. So props to Paul for getting that. I think his response was telling. I think his demeanor in the press conferences this week have been telling as well. And I think you have to look at the exponential impact that this situation is having on the organization. It doesn't sound like a guy that has faith in his quarterback to really open up the playbook and just let it rip. Like everybody keeps saying, like, oh, the deep balls from the Atlanta game. I like Jay Nelson's comment a second ago. At this point, the Atlanta game never happened. Okay, let's just put that Atlanta game out of our memories at this point. Let's forget about it. I'm guilty of falling for it too. When I evaluated that draft class, I said, no, I don't want Will Levis. Hashtag never Levis. I was a part of that movement. And I watched that Atlanta game. I watched the Pittsburgh game and the Miami game last season. And I thought, okay, maybe I was wrong. But now we're 5 games into this season, and we're seeing the same things that I saw on his tape at Kentucky that I wrote about doing his evaluation for that year's draft class. And I maybe you can be critical of Brian Callahan for trying to fit the square peg into the round hole with this offense. But at a certain point, man, like Will Levis has to have some accountability here, because all offseason we said, okay, what would he be if the protection was good? They go out, they retool the offensive line. Hasn't looked good the first 4 games of the season. Looked okay in this game. I thought they played their best game of the season. No sacks. To the point, I would say they were probably pretty good on Sunday as well. Not the best, most fearsome, healthy defensive front.
The penalties or something, but from a protection standpoint, I agree with you.
I mean, compared to what we'd seen the weeks before,
yes.
maybe it is like the psychological impact of just watching such bad play that okay play seems good. Maybe that's it. But the protection, I think at the very least we can agree the protection was not an issue for Will Levis on Sunday. We said, hey, imagine what he could be if we could get some more weapons around him. They go out and they get Calvin Ridley. They add Tyler Boyd. They draft Jaquan Jackson. They sign Tony Pollard. All these new pieces, and it doesn't make a bit of difference if he can't get him the damn ball. What if the defense is better? What if he doesn't have to go out there and score 1 million points? And then they go out, they retool the defense, they bring in Denard Wilson as the defensive coordinator. They're looking pretty damn good, and then they're giving up points in the fourth quarter, which I think is also fair to wonder how much are these deflating mistakes and turnovers taking the air out of the defense right now, because what we're seeing is the worst performance in the fourth quarter when they've been asked yet again, week in and week out, you guys have to go pitch a shutout to win us this game. All right, these questions are getting answered, man. The protection, the offensive line is getting better. It's really starting to gel. He has more weapons around him. He has a better defense. Schematically, I like this offense. I know people are taking shots at Brian Callahan in the comments. I will defend him because I've watched the tape every game, and I see plenty of moments in each and every game that I think that should have been a big play, that should have been a throw that Will Levis hit, and he's not hitting them. And it's the same stuff over and over. The ball placement's erratic. It's in front of the receiver, behind the receiver. It's late. He's telegraphing his throws. The interception in this game was terrible. And people came after me when I tweeted, hey, I'm ready to close the book on Will Levis after that game. Go check out on Twitter. Superhorn has a thread of the Will Levis throws from Sunday, and my sentiments exactly match that. Like, it's bad. The timing of Will Levis, his internal clock, is just completely broken. And maybe you play the patient game and you ride it out with him, but I'm at a point where I think the answer's already there. And I think Paul Kaharski also has a great piece, talked about it on yesterday's episode of A Football Show as well, that this play caller, the way he's calling this offense right now, seems to indicate that they have their decision on Will Levis. And I think it aligns with what we're thinking about this quarterback.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good points in there. One, the accountability on Will Levis's part is something that I think has also been very highly contested and talked about this week. I do want to bring up just another disconnect I feel like there is between Will Levis and the quarterback right now, or in the head coach right now, that I found really, really interesting. First of all, it starts with Will Levis after the game against the Indianapolis Colts, where he talked about, because I think you saw 3 or 4 throws that looked uncharacteristically bad. And I know that Will Levis has had some bad throws, but a lot of those deep balls and those long shots down the field seem to sit in the air for a whole heck of a lot more time than we are used to seeing Will Levis like hang the ball in the air like that. And so we asked Will Levis about, what kind of contributed to that, those throws, and specifically the one where it was just a ball that was hanging up there. Calvin Ridley doesn't really ever play defense on it, and they're just able to pick it off with ease to kind of seal the deal on the game, more or less. Here's what Will Levis had to say about that interception.
I think I could have given myself some more depth away. Peter came up, told me he got a little push, but I can't let that be the reason for it up there. But I thought it was one of the throws today where I kind of felt the lack of arm strength or whatever, where I feel like a healthier day, I'm putting a better ball on it on more of a line. So it's frustrating. We were able to get the ball back, and still makes an opportunity after that, but didn't make it work. But yeah, that's a throw I'd like to have back for sure. Will did the shorter.
And so he says that the shoulder wasn't quite ready for this game, which I was in the press conference, and I'm glad Teron asked the question, because it really felt like they wanted to get Will out of there after he said that. But they asked a follow-up, which kind of was along the same lines of the question I wanted to ask, which was, so you said that you didn't have enough arm strength. So where does that put you on the scale of being fully healthy, or where are you? And so Will Levis answered that by saying he didn't feel like he was 100% in this game, which is very interesting and very telling, because when asked about it yesterday by, I believe it was Terry McCormick, who asked Brian Callahan about what Will Levis said, here's what Callahan had to say.
But then he also said that on the interception, he felt like that had his shoulder been better, he could have made a better throw. Sure. How do you balance that, and what kind of was the situation with his arm yesterday?
Everything leading up to the game and practice and everything felt like he's good enough to make the throws that he needed to make to win. And I didn't have any reservations necessarily about that. I didn't think there was any real ill effect. I mean, I knew there was going to be some pain. That's just part of it. I appreciate him trying to manage that and fight through it for his teammates and for our team. I didn't see anything that would have made me feel like he wasn't able or willing to actually be able to play at the level he needed to play at. That throw at the interception, he had pressure kind of in his face, and he couldn't quite get everything into it anyway. I don't know that an arm strength or a healthy shoulder would have made much of a difference, truthfully. But he's whatever he had to say is how he felt. But I didn't feel anything going into the week that would lead me to believe that he wasn't ready.
So 2 different answers there. One saying, I don't think Will Levis's shoulder really affected anything that he could do or did. And Will Levis himself saying that it felt like it did affect, whether that is excuse making or not. I feel like that, that's a question that you can ask. I don't think that's necessarily a way or a place we should go, but still, the point of it all is that I think it is concerning to a point that it feels like we're starting to see cracks between the quarterback and the head coach / play caller not being on the same page here.
Yeah, and if I may add real quick, JT, I don't love that he mentioned Peter allowing a pressure. Like, if that's not an impact on the play and you don't want to throw Big Meat Pete under the bus, just don't let that slip at all. Just don't bring that up at all. And he phrased it as a way of like, oh, well, Peter told me he gave up a pressure and I shouldn't let that affect. Like, it's still out there now. It's still out there that conversation happened. And in his mind, I think he thinks that probably had something to do with it. I didn't like that comment at all. I didn't like that he let that slip. It kind of felt like a sign of, you're talking about Pete giving up a pressure. You're talking about your shoulder. It doesn't sound very accountable to me. Just own it and say it.
Yeah. And so it'll be really interesting to see this week how things bounce back. And I think we're getting to a point here, though, where it seems like a lot of people in the comments with the same, with me and you, it's frustrating because we see that when it works for Brian Callahan's scheme, but we're getting to a point, and this is where I think we can take the conversation here in a second, where Fade in the comments here says Brian Callahan is the variable. I hate to say it, but man, I think we're getting to a point where you can make the argument that it's time to see maybe a proof of concept from Brian Callahan in terms of, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but like playing Mason Rudolph, someone who can operate an offense just with, not as many hitches and discrepancies there in that offense. It might be time to see if Brian Callahan can do both play calling and scheming up this offense and also being the head coach with a guy who's not going to do as many turnover worthy plays as a guy like Will Levis.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation to come out of this game, JT. It's like, okay, we've talked about the Will Levis experiment. We've talked about getting to a point where you have your answer on Will Levis, but it's been so bad that I don't think we can get a good read on Brian Callahan as a play caller. So at what point do you want to see him get in there with at least a stabilizing force at the quarterback position just to see what this offense can truly do? Because it hasn't been great on his front. And I think there are many critiques we can talk about with Brian Callahan so far, but sticking to the Will Levis, Brian Callahan dynamic right now, I don't know that we know what Brian Callahan really is as a play caller right now.
Yeah. And so I think that's the final verdict for me, is that I think the verdict is secretly in on Will Levis and that this is not something that will work out. Things obviously can change. And I know that there's a lot of people out there saying that Will Levis can be a competent quarterback, just not on this team. I feel like I'm slowly but surely getting into that boat because, with this team and the kind of structure that they've dug themselves into with these kind of 2 to 3 year contracts with some big name free agent talent, feels like you don't have that time to let a Will Levis develop into that competent quarterback he can be in year 3 or 4, right? That's not something I think is in the timeline or in the cards for this team. Cards were that if he's going to hit, it has to be this year, and then we can go from there. But obviously, only time will tell. But I don't feel good about the Will Levis situation right now. Stoney, you said you have a exercise in psychology on this whole matter that you want to bring up here.
Yeah, I want to go through this, JT. First of all, I want to plug yesterday's episode of A Football Show right here on the wonderful 440 Sports Network. I thought Braden and Paul had a fantastic discussion about the very issue we're talking about and like the Brian Callahan, Will Levis dynamic. And we mentioned Paul asking Brian Callahan to his face if his play calling tendencies indicated the verdict is in on Levis. Great question. We saw Brian Callahan pause. I thought Braden raised an excellent point about That's not usually the case with Brian Callahan. He's been a little pausey this week, and usually he's an articulate guy that has an answer ready to go right off the bat, but it wasn't the case. He really looked like, to me, a guy that was struggling to form thoughts in a way that he didn't want to start, throwing people under the bus. So I ask you, as a guy, I have a psychology degree from the Harvard of the South, MTSU, Middle Tennessee State. So I want to turn this on you, JT. I want to ask you, if you ever find yourself in a position where someone asks you a question and you have to pause to gather yourself before you're answering, why? Why is that the case usually for you?
For me, it's I don't want to say something I don't really mean, or something that I'm actually thinking. Obviously,
yes.
with coach speak, it's a lot of that's it. He's trying to formulate an answer in coach speak language that gives little to nothing away.
Yeah. So I wrote down two possibilities there when you have to pause and think about it. You don't know, and you have to come up with something so that you have something to say, or you can't say what you really want to say, what you're really feeling, and you have to be careful about how you craft your statement. So I ask you then, JT, if that logic holds up, what's more likely? A guy that has this level of NFL experience, that's worked in the league for this long, with the quarterbacks that he has worked with, what's more likely? That he just doesn't know anything, that he just doesn't have any answers as to what's going on with this team, or that he knows he can't say certain things out loud to the media?
I feel like it's the latter, potentially.
That's what I feel. And so if that's the case, then JT, what could he possibly be feeling right now that he can't say out loud?
Frustration, mostly. I would think. One.
Your Honor, I rest my case.
Yes, and so here's the kicker, though, right, with the Will Levis situation, and I think QB coach Sean McAvoy chimes in perfectly in the comments, which is going to make everyone watching this right now, is that with everything we've just said, Will Levis is going to continue to be the quarterback, because I think he brings up an excellent point where it says it feels impossible to divorce the coach from the quarterback. Have to imagine his case to be the head coach and get hired was a developmental and success plan for Levis. If he benches Levis, he's admitting his own failure, which I think is a fantastic point. And
we got to listen to Coach McAvoy now.
One of the major reasons why, as we were going to get here, I still think, the proof of concept for at least the upper management of the Tennessee Titans is there for Brian Callahan. And so they're going to continue to play Will Levis nevertheless, even through this all. Now, I think with Will Levis, at this point, why don't you just let him just sling it? Like, at this point, because
that's where I'm
even with some of the play calling, I know someone in the comments brought up here as well, the fact that through, when I charted this game for fantasy points, it took until this was the middle of the second drive, but it took until there were 8 minutes left in the first quarter of this game to see Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins take the field for this team. If we're going to talk about building confidence for a young Will Levis in the beginning of the game, getting Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins not on the field until the 8-minute mark is unacceptable, I think, in my opinion. What are you really going to accomplish on that first drive if you want to set the pace with the run game? Sure, that's fine. But if we're going to keep guys like Treylon Burks and NWI out there on the first drive and unable to go here, what are we doing in terms of play calling then?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid criticism of Callahan. I think you can criticize the amount of play action or lack thereof that he's running. They're not running under center very often. I think he's not been very adaptable after saying this summer that you got to be adaptable in the NFL. It very much seems like he wants Will Levis to fit in his offense and be his style of quarterback. I think you have a pretty interesting matchup tight end in Chigakonkwo that they're not really using as a matchup guy. So like I said, there are plenty of reasons to critique Callahan, but and again, I jotted down, like, get Ridley involved earlier, get your playmakers involved earlier. I think it was a screenplay that oh, you know what? Maybe we're talking about the 3rd and 4 where Hop and Ridley aren't on the field altogether, and it's like a screen that you're
The
like,
jig that gets 1 yard and they're off the field.
it's
Yeah.
like, where are these guys? Like, I don't know. I think it's
Feels like
it's
a play where you could put Tyler Boyd in to
yeah,
like
it's
secure the first down and do what Tyler Boyd came here to do, which is be that guy that's going to prolong drives and move the chains. Like,
yeah. I mean,
maybe,
it's
maybe I'm just crazy and I don't get it. So
it's stuff like that that I kind of feel like are evidence that maybe you do have a coach that's still trying to figure it out. And I think those are instances that would probably be easier to forgive if the end result of what's happening on this offense wasn't happening. Because it's nice and easy for us to sit here and say, get Chig involved earlier, get Ridley involved earlier, do more play action, run from under center more, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, if Will Levis is still not hitting the throws, then it doesn't really matter. The offense is still hamstrung. And that's kind of where I'm at. Now, I think the interesting question is that I agree personally, I would be riding it out with Levis the rest of the season. I know I've talked so much shit this episode about him, but I'm still riding it out with him in the off chance that, yeah, there is a plan and it does finally click for him. And maybe you do see some signs of life, but in the worst case scenario, this thing just bottoms out and they get a high draft pick and they get the quarterback of their choosing in the draft next spring. That's a possibility. But I think the interesting direction that this conversation goes, and forgive me if I'm jumping the gun on the agenda, JT, is at what point do you consider like the other players in the locker room, people that might be frustrated, people that want to win now? And if the belief starts to creep in, I listened to Blaine and Zach today, and I thought it was really interesting that Blaine said he didn't think we're there yet, where players are in the building starting to give up on Will Levis. But if we do get to that point, at what point then do you have to make the switch just to kind of save the locker room?
yeah, I think that's an interesting point. But before we continue with this frustration and madness, got to give a big shout out to our sponsor here, Sinkers Beverages, who have been serving the East Nashville area for over 4 decades. They are a 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, as voted on by you. Got to get in with their in-crowd program for special allocations, events, and tastings that happen every other week. I know I'm going to try to get out to one of those in the next couple of weeks as we get closer into the fall seasons. I love, those seasonal cocktails and things that just really, as the temperature outside gets a lot colder, that's when I love to, unleash the palate, and no other place to do that than at Sinkers Beverages. Also, I know they have their very small selection of very high-end bourbons and other spirits coming soon. So you can only know about those and when they come into stock. If you join the in-crowd, got to give them a follow on all their socials at Sinkers Bev on Twitter, Instagram, all of those things like that. And then if you can't make it out there, no worries. They got you. They search them on Uber Eats at Sinkers, and they deliver the booze to you because they drive so you can drink. Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages, their sister store in Hendersonville that have been serving that location for over 50 years. Thank you to Sinkers and Bluegrass Beverages. All right, Stoney, I think we got to get to some of these comments here because the people have been patiently waiting, putting their comments into here.
Yeah,
and obviously,
that's my bad. I'm fired up.
I want to hear what some of the people have to say about Will Levis and this Titans team as a whole, starting with Eddie, who says, live by the sword, die by the sword. No reason to quit Levis now that the season's over. Obviously, they still have, 10 more games to play or so, something like that. I can't do quick math right now trying to go through this comment section. But obviously, I do agree to some extent that there really is no point to quit on him now because there's really not much more for you to do right now. It's the fact that Will Levis is not playing very good ball whatsoever, and they're still just losing barely in these 1-score games that I think gives them the biggest reasoning as to why they're going to continue to roll him out there. Kenneth, going a little bit further, saying it's time to do this rebuild correctly. Jettison Levis, stack picks, let Callahan and Carthen pick their quarterback together, stop all these disjointed, forced marriages. I think that, while I somewhat agree with him that a cleaner rebuild would make more sense, it's kind of hard considering where they are right now in the team building process, and especially with how much money they put into this team this year. Kenneth says he wants his money back for what him and his dad watched Sunday. Embarrassing doesn't cover it.
Well, hold on. If
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, Kenneth can correct me, but I think Kenneth at least got some Hattie B's out of that. I think he got some hot chicken. I think he posted it on Twitter. I feel like I saw that.
Maybe that was the highlight.
It's never a bad day when you can get some Nashville hot chicken.
This is true. This is very true. A. Jensen says Nick Holtz needs to go. He brings absolutely no value.
What does Nick Holtz do?
I mean,
tell us, JT.
Was I the first person to be on this where I call it where he was simply, when they hired him, I said he was just a guy and he really has done nothing more? The problem with Nick Holtz is that we really never can see what he does, mostly because of him not having those play calling duties. Obviously, we get to talk to him once a week, and the answers he gives us, are pretty in line with what we've come to expect from this staff here. But I will say there really is no way to know exactly what Nick Holtz does because we just simply aren't in the building. If I had my best guess, I feel like he's the liaison between Brian Callahan's scheme and the players. And if the players aren't really understanding the scheme very well, which it doesn't feel like they are, maybe that has to do with Nick Holtz and the way that he's delivering it there. But that's my best guess. That's not something that I'm reporting or anything like that. That's simply my best guess from reading the tea leaves there. Joshua also agrees with the sentiment the Titans need to live and die with Levis this year because Carson Beck or Cam Ward in 2025. No, listen, this will be something we talk about for the long time, but I am absolutely out right now on every single quarterback in this class.
I'm going to be talked back into Carson Beck. I'm still mad. I got a sour taste in my mouth after that Alabama game. Everybody said that he came back in the second half and had a nice game, but I don't necessarily agree with that. And I'm so far out on Cam Ward. Cam Ward is. Do you just want a few more years of Will Levis? Because I feel like that's what Cam Ward's going to be.
Jordan kind of agrees with you there to an earlier point. He says you also have to think of the other 51 guys on the roster. You get your back blown out by the Bills, this locker room might just go south. It really depends. Like if they get clobbered, I could see that. If they continue to lose these, I get the sense the frustration is definitely building, but it feels like right now this team still believes in each other. And I think that's where they are right now. Fade saying when your game plan is to throw it short, all the defense has to do is sit on the routes. I think that's another interesting point, and one we've seen in 2 weeks now, not this week, but a couple of weeks before that. We've seen that if they aren't going to test over the top with Will Levis's arm, it makes it easy for some of these corners to really just sit on that route and do what Jair Alexander did and really cut the route there.
I was about to say the same thing. That's how multiple teams have attacked the Titans offense this season. They're just dropping back and trusting Will Levis not to really connect on the deep throws, and he's not going through his reads and even hitting the underneath stuff. So the response by the Titans has been to run the ball. But when you start getting stood up in the run game, there's nowhere to really go from there. So I think that's kind of part of what got us to this conservative play calling.
Yeah, and Chef Ran asks, is Callie and Ran on the hot seat? I don't think so whatsoever, but that's my opinion.
Listen,
unless you have a hotter opinion.
I'm not going to rule anything out with ownership because
that's fair.
You just don't know. Just don't know what's going to happen. We'll just leave it at that.
Personally, I think that Ran, for better or for worse, at least this class, last year's class is a mixed bag, but I still think Peter Skoronski's on a decent trajectory to be a plus starter here in the NFL, even if it is going to take a little bit more time than we thought. But I mean, if you look at this year's class, I think as a talent evaluator in the draft, I think Ran has really proved his worth there.
Yeah,
I think,
for sure.
I think it's unfair to give Callahan, 8 games and then pull the plug on him and say he's on the hot seat here. Let's see what else we have here in the comments. Fade bringing up Will is frustrated. Ridley is frustrated. D-Hop is getting touches because he's open. Chig is a blocker now. Wiley is getting touches, no passes to the running backs. I do think that they do need a little bit of a hard reset on this offense from that perspective. I feel like, especially in the preseason, we saw a lot of balls going to the running backs and to these tight ends in the flat and making those easy plays, whether it's just because Will Levis has lost said confidence over those first 3 weeks and how many plays like that destroyed him. I don't know if that's brings that into the discussion, but it feels like we've gotten so far away from what we saw earlier in the year. Tom asks here in the question, in the comments here, his question, what do you think if Mason started week 1, what would the record be? He says 4-1.
Man, I don't know.
I would say maybe I probably give this team one more win, and it's probably the Chicago game.
I was just about to say the same thing, because I think that result was...
because if Mason starts that Jets game, Mason doesn't make the throws Will does to keep them in that game.
Yeah,
that's a game where they lose by even more than they did, because Mason Rudolph just simply can't make that throw. But yeah, I mean, what are they now? They're 1-4. They would be 2-3 in my book. Would they have won this game? Maybe, but maybe I'd put them at 3 and maybe I put them at 3-2. I think they might have.
Chicago
they
is
could have this game with Mason.
Chicago is as far as I'm willing to go, because I think that was directly impacted by the flick 6 that Levis threw in that one. Yeah.
Let's see what else we have here in the comments before.
People are fired up today, man.
They are fired up today. Jake says that Holtz is a lizard man scapegoat. I don't, maybe that's something.
I like him. I want him doing ASMR. Read me fairy tales so I can go to sleep. Nick Holtz.
Yeah, I mean, Chef says here, and I think this is something we'll talk about on Friday, the Bills could give the Titans a real hard reset with what they have right now.
Yeah.
But TJ says, don't let people hear you say that. Mason Rudolph is Brady. Don't you hear? Yeah. For some reason, people think that if they like I said, this is why it's such an interesting conversation, because would it really be a variable test for Brian Callahan if you put Mason Rudolph in there? I don't know, because then again, you look at some of the throws that have worked for Will Levis. Those are things that simply Mason Rudolph cannot do. And so I don't know if that's exactly proof of concept there. But I mean, the frustration is warranted because, like you said, you're fitting a Will Levis shaped peg into for me, it's looked a lot like a Joe Burrow-esque offense from what I've watched so far. And you're trying to fit Will Levis into that, which we knew from the start when he was hired. I remember when me and Easton were going on this show back in February and March, saying that Will Levis is not and will never be the same kind of quarterback Joe Burrow is. And so I don't know if that's something that maybe Brian Callahan thinks differently, but that's where I feel like we are right now.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get out of here, before we continue to talk in circles, I do want to bring up one more thing about the Indianapolis and Titans game specifically, because we did have some people in the comments give us backlash and said, Fade said, we are putting this game on the defense, or Kyle saying, yeah, we get it. Levis is mid, not a shocker. Can you address the other 10 problems going on? Or is this going to be another Mariota situation where we blame Levis and then everyone gets fired later? I don't think by any means necessary that we are putting this game on the defense. I think the defense is the reason they've been in these one-score games. You look at what they did against the Indianapolis Colts. They, once again, for the 5th straight game to start 2024, have kept their opponent below 200 passing yards. And I believe against the Indianapolis Colts run defense without Jonathan Taylor, they allowed them only 2.9 yards per carry. And obviously, when you have the defense out there so much like they do in this game, you see the same thing happen over the last 3 games that they've played at home, which is the gas they run out of gas, and that's where the opposing team is able to kind of take over.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think Kyle needs to go visit Sinker's Beverages Pour yourself a nice drink tonight, Kyle. Prop your feet up and think about something other than Titans football. All right. It's going to be okay, buddy. We still have each other. This is what we're here for, this community. I will say, I think the defense is one of the best in the league until we get late in the game when they give up a back-breaking play. What I am insinuating earlier by criticizing the defense is not to imply correlation implies causation, psychology degree, remember, but if these back-breaking turnovers by the offense are deflating the team and it's harder to play to get up, is that something that's impacting the defense late? And we're seeing them kind of break later on in the game. I think that's what I want to know about the defense. I don't think it's necessarily a critique of them. It just kind of feels coincidental that in their weakest moments this season, they've been late in the game when they need to really bow up and clamp down on an offense. And part of me just wonders the psyche of the unit. Is it a case where they're like, we can't slip up, we can't make a mistake, and then you end up making a mistake?
Yeah, and I think with that, I mean, we can talk about the penalties. 11 penalties for 113 yards, I believe, was the final line there, with 3 of them being those 2 of them being pass interference and 1 illegal contact downfield that kind of continued to give the Indianapolis Colts new life. And specifically with one of those backbreaking plays, it comes from what Brian Callahan considers to be and Denard Wilson considers to be one of the best corners in the league, in L'Jarius Sneed. And I think we can talk about real quick before we get out of here, kind of some notes from this game. And I think one of the biggest ones for me is that I question whether or not L'Jarius Sneed has lost a step, or if this knee injury / nagging injury for L'Jarius Sneed is something that is a lot more than he lets us let on about. I think that when you look at the plays that haven't necessarily worked for other teams, but you see Alec Pierce and Tyreek Hill and these guys just burning by L'Jarius Sneed, and L'Jarius Sneed doing some uncharacteristically different things to what we've seen him do in Kansas City, which is struggle to keep pace with some of these wide receivers. And that's where you see some of those back-breaking plays. And so I wonder that if we, as a media collective and the Titans fan base as a whole, are kind of relying too much on L'Jarius Sneed to be that guy who can do it all, like we may have thought he could. I just wonder whether or not it's going to maybe regress to a better version of Sneed that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on, and I'm not ready to close the book on Sneed just yet, but I do think he had a pretty rough game on Sunday, and it seems to be situations where he is expecting safety help, or he thinks safety help is supposed to be there. So he's not really punching. He's not really getting physical with the guy at the line of scrimmage. There seems to be issues with his his ability to plant and change direction, where he's losing ground to guys. And then in contested catch situations, I mean, you saw what happened on the Michael Pittman touchdown. That's a play where they get a matchup. Michael Pittman catches those jump balls, good hands. He's got length. Flacco just hurls it up, and he just overpowers him for the touchdown. So I think there are reasons to be concerned. And my question to you guys privately, when we were kind of dissecting this yesterday morning in the group chat, is like, I wonder if there's something more to the injury than we're letting on. And I wonder if maybe the lack of pass rush is asking him to cover longer than he was in Kansas City. Those are things I don't know because I haven't studied 100% of the Kansas City tape this season, but it's just a question. Like it's the performance is bad enough that you're like, what's going on here? You have to start looking for reasons.
Yeah, I agree. And so obviously we got to get you out of here because you do have a big time show to get to.
Yeah,
But
I gotta get moving.
Before we get out of here, let's just talk about some good things about the Titans real quick. Empty some of our favorite notes. I'll go first. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. continues to be a stud for this team.
Yes.
I loved when I talked to him on Thursday about his sentiment about how, he's a rookie and he's going to make rookie mistakes, but it's how you bounce back from those. We saw proof of concept there where Jarvis Brownlee Jr. makes the illegal contact play that puts them deep into the red zone for the Indianapolis Colts. And then on 3rd and goal, he absolutely stifles Josh Downs at the line of scrimmage and forces them to kick a field goal that going to kick anyways. I love seeing the tenacity that he's playing with, as well as, his confidence that he also is playing with. That's something that I think is a huge bright spot for this team. It's also should be noted, as part of my job here real quick, Tyjae Spears will be week to week. So it looks like it'll be a lot more Tony Pollard and Joshua Kelly, maybe, and Julius Chestnut. Those are the 3 running backs they now have in absence of Tyjae Spears. Stoney, some things that you thought were very productive from this game for the Titans.
Well, I was going to make a joke and ask if Cheeto and Brownlee should be the starting corners when Cheeto gets healthy, but I don't feel like the comment section is really in the mood for jokes today, so I'm going to shelf that one. I'm gonna keep it simple, or else we'll be here the rest of the afternoon. But Tavondre Sweat walking down Quentin Nelson on 3rd and goal to clog up the run and force 4th and goal was football porn. Love me some Tavondre Sweat.
Yes.
I'm with Jordan, JC Latham, LT1.
Bottom line, the rookie class is paying dividends so far for this team, unlike the big free agents who have not done so.
Except for Jaquan Jackson, who we're trading for Bryce Young.
That this is true. That's going to happen next week. You heard it here first, but that's going to do it for us today on the Hot Read podcast. Appreciate everyone being here and joining in on the discussion today about the Tennessee Titans and their kind of lost season so far. But we'll be back on Friday, where the Titans will most likely have to pull a miracle to turn around their season against the Buffalo Bills, who now have a shiny new wide receiver 1 that they're going to have to contend with. How much will we see of him this week? That's something we'll discuss on Friday's show. Thank you once again to everybody here. And remember to like and subscribe over on the Broadway Sports Media and 440 YouTube channels. And for Stoney, this has been the Hot Read podcast. We will see you on Friday. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages.